Welcome to the People Skills for Introverts podcast. I'm Scott Tran, and today we're going to explore the art of making small talk. Remember the last time you were trapped in an awkward conversation with someone you had just met? Do you stay? Do you go? What do you say?
The common thread, I would say, was that we would take people who were interesting. And by interesting, I don't mean here's a guy with a funny mole on his face, or here's a guy who all of his friends say he's really funny. Somebody who, in their field, has done something that makes them stand out. And so we would have people who were actors or movie directors or musicians or app makers or famous bloggers, artists, people who had done something that we liked, something that we appreciated. And we'd bring them on to just have a conversation. So it was kind of like a little bit meet your heroes. If you could sit down with your favorite singer and just have a conversation, what would that conversation sound like? If you had any kind of social skills and could just like chit chat with people, and you're forced to sit down with one of your heroes for 45 minutes to talk about literally anything except for work, what would that conversation sound like?
That's Dave Wiskus, talking about the Unprofessional podcast. It's a show that invited people of note to talk about anything except for their work. Which means that the success of the show depended on not just making small talk, but making it engaging and interesting. So you invited people on the show because of their work, and you wouldn't talk to them about it?
Right. And it was the reason that it was let's not talk about work was one kind of a necessity in the beginning, because we weren't allowed to talk about technology stuff because Lex's boss said no. But that was the starting point. But really, we kept that rule long after we needed to, because it forced us to have real conversations with people. Because if you're at a party and you start with, so what do you do? You're having a superficial, like chit-chatty BS conversation. And what we wanted was more of a, hey, what do you think about this thing? Or here's a thing that happened to me. Now tell your story. And it became more of a real conversation where it would be born out of like whatever we were thinking at that second. And we came up with a couple of tricks, like how to seed something. But usually it turns out that if you're friendly and you're talking to interesting people, you can say pretty much anything, you're going to get an interesting response. And then your job is to be interesting back to them.
So did you do any prep for the show?
Oh, it was a rule. We did zero prep. That was the point of the show.
At this point, you might be thinking Dave has always been great at making small talk. Think again. Here's Dave talking about his younger days.
I will say this. Having done a bunch of podcasts, having talked to large numbers of people socially as a result of doing this, I did not grow up an extrovert. I was very introverted. There was a point in my life when I was 18 years old and my social anxiety was so severe that I couldn't take my trash out during the day because I was worried that people would see me here. And I didn't think of myself as particularly socially awkward at the time. It was just more that I was bad at talking to people. I liked the things that made me comfortable, and I didn't like new situations, new people. I got a little older and I started realizing that it was holding me back, and I made it a point to force myself to meet new people and to put myself into situations that were uncomfortable to me. And what I've learned over the last few years of doing the podcast and doing public speaking and doing public appearance stuff, like for me, the hard part of giving a talk at a conference isn't giving the talk. For me, the hard part is meeting the people after, when they come up and they'll want to like say nice things or have a little bit of conversation with me. That's the part that drains me. And it's because that kind of conversation, even this kind of conversation, doesn't come naturally in the way that you might expect. I'm not a person who's like born to be social and friendly and whatever. But I've learned that for the most part, other people are just as afraid of you as you are of them.
You did so many of these off-the-cuff conversations on the show. Did it get easy, or were you still nervous about it?
Yeah, that's my personality, and but that's the good news.
Right, it can be done.
Yeah, the good, just like, you know, these people didn't become app making or blogging celebrities like by fluke or something. It's work. I do it anyway. I get on a Skype call with somebody and I just do it anyway. It's not the most comfortable or natural thing in the world to me, but I do it anyway.
Since you did no prep before a show and you couldn't talk about work, how did you get the conversation started?
There was a thing that would happen before we'd get on the Skype call, and it wasn't just, the Skype call is connected and the show starts. There's always a minute or two where we're helping somebody get their audio set up properly. We're showing them how to record their end of the thing. And through that, there will always be a, hey, sorry I was late, I had to deal with my dogs, or, oh yeah, I just, glad I made it on time, I just got back from this thing. There was always like a little bit of pre-show chit-chat, like just kind of like the small talk that you make when you walk into a room and there's other people. And so by the time the show started, we had some seed. We had some idea that we could launch with. People love talking about their pets. People love talking about their kids. People love talking about themselves. There's so much more to people than their jobs, which is kind of what we were trying to highlight, especially with people that you only know for their work. And when you feel it, when you hear it, you kind of know what that seed should be over the course of a little bit of small talk. And worst case scenario, you just have like a couple of canned ideas in your head. Like, hey, we haven't done a show where we talk about travel stuff. And maybe I've got a trip coming up and I have a funny travel story from before and I want to talk about how I feel about flying. So if there's nothing else, then I'll just throw out like a travel story and we'll run from there.
Was it always easy? Did you have any guests that didn't warm up right away?
I can speak sort of generally. We'd had people on the show where they were great at what they did, super interesting people, but you would get like 1 to 2 word replies if you asked a question. People who are introverted don't want to be forced into being extroverted. And so they're happy to come on a show, and maybe because they like the show, or maybe because they like the idea, or they think they should be getting out there more. But if you try to put them on the spot and make them feel like they need to talk, you're going to get them to clam up.
What do you do with 1 or 2 word answers? How do you keep the conversation going?
If you're getting 1 word responses, it's more or less one of 2 things. It's going to be because you're asking yes or no questions, which is a terrible thing to do as an interviewer. Or it's going to be because your subject just isn't comfortable or isn't interesting. And it's not a battle of who can be more interesting, but it's a question of how can I make you seem more interesting? And if you're in a good cycle, everybody feels like they're interesting. Everybody feels like they're adding something to the stew. Everybody feels like they're engaged and having fun. But at its absolute best, it just feels like 3 people talking.
Hmm. It almost seems like improv.
Oh, absolutely. It's very yes and. It has to be yes and. You keep feeding into the other person. They feed back to you.
Here's how yes and works in improv. No matter what your fellow actors say, instead of disagreeing with it, your job is to accept it, regardless of where you want it to go, and then add to it.
The real trick is nobody wants to have a boring conversation. And most people are going to look for the thing about you that is interesting. They're going to, in the same way that if you're up giving a talk, nobody wants to sit through a bad talk. Nobody's waiting for you to screw up. They're looking for the reason that their time wasn't wasted. And in a conversation, it's a similar sort of thing. And if you can just get over that concern that you're disappointing the other person, or that you're somehow not good enough to be in that conversation, and relax, it kind of just happens naturally. Human beings are social creatures. We've had, plenty of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of years of evolution to get to this point where we talk to each other. It's it's one of the most natural things we can do is communicate. So if you just kind of like relax into it, it just happens. It's like breathing. If you're thinking too hard about it, you're going to notice it. But if you just kind of like forget about it, it happens without you needing to control it manually.
Starting and keeping a conversation going are extremely valuable skills. But you have to know how to end a conversation too. All good things must come to an end. How do you know when you found a good closer? What were the signs?
You could just smell it. You know it. When you hear it, you know it. There's a line, there's something that's like a callback to something from earlier, or it's just funny on its own, or something unexpected. It's just got to be punctuation. It's got to be just like a little bit of a sucker punch. It's got to feel like either a tidy wrap up, or I don't know, like in the same way that you know when the song is over. Like there's no one way to end a song. You can have it fade out. You can have it like end on a beat. You can have it end with some resolution of the chorus or some resolution of the verse. Or there's a million ways to end a song. There's a million ways to end a podcast. It was just kind of like a way of you'd feel it and you'd know it was right.
And with that, our time is at an end too. Thank you for listening, and special thanks to Dave Wiskus. Check out his work on the Better Elevation channel on YouTube, where he talks about how and why things get made. If you enjoyed this episode, let Dave know on Twitter at @dwiskus.